and when he's old, he will not depart from it. My parents, who were Christians and very conservative, took that verse seriously, and they really tried to do the best with us. I was from a large extended family of Christians, and we farmed together, we worshiped together, we celebrated birthdays together, ate together every Sunday. We were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, foot washings all the time. And at age 9, I accepted the Lord and was baptized. At age 12, I had the challenge of my life when I became sick. My parents thought I had the flu, and my father said they really, really needed me in the fields because the wheat was coming on and the alfalfa was ready, and we cousins were all used to running the haying part. And he told me he needed me on the baler that day. I'd been sick for a couple of days, and I tried to drive the baler, but before noon I couldn't stand it anymore, and so I told him I needed to get off the baler, and he had my cousin take over. They left me on down where we left the water jugs, and at noon they took me to the house. That night I had a horrible night, had nightmares, and the next day my grandfather came and prayed for me, and finally in the afternoon he told my mother she needs to go to the doctor. And so I was taken to the hospital. I had ruptured appendix. The doctor he tried to go in and remove it, but he came out and told my parents, he said, you've got to, if you're praying people, now's the time to pray. He said, she's in the Lord's hands. Her insides are all scrambled. She's full of gangrene. All I could do was put in tubes to try to drain that gangrene out of her body. That night I had today what they call 2 different out-of-body experiences. I remember it very vividly, and I won't go into that, but it's like it happened yesterday. And so I was in the hospital. Well, and I validated that a few years ago when I saw my hospital records. They lost all my vitals for 9.5 minutes one time and 5.5 minutes for another time. No heartbeat, nothing. And so I do know that the Lord's with you at all times. I was in the hospital. I was in a coma for over 10 days, and I was in the hospital for over a month. When I was released, I was told I'd be sick my whole life, never be able to work, never be able to have children. And on the way across town, as my mother took me to my grandparents' house, where I was going to have to live for the next year, because I still had those drains, I couldn't ride across the rocky roads to our house. And my mother said, we're not claiming that. The Lord knows your path. You were dedicated as a child. You're his child, and you're going to do what your life will be what the Lord has. Well, you would think with that kind of a background, I would make good decisions. But as I grew, the world I was entering was wholly different than what my parents had prepared me for. Our world in 1967, when I graduated from high school, was a world where the GIs were being disrespected when they got home from Vietnam, where our political figures were being assassinated or had been assassinated. Boys were burning their draft cards, and girls were burning their bras, and there were riots. And it was just such an unknown time to me. And soon after that, then, abortion became legal. So the world was just turned upside down for me, and I started making really bad decisions. I told my parents I was going to college, and that didn't go over so well. They weren't in favor of that. But I worked 3 jobs to try to put myself through college, 2 and 3 jobs, most of my college career to earn my degree. Became very proud of my independence, and that pride led me to make even more bad decisions. In 1980, I found myself in a really dark place in my life. I'd divorced and was remarried. And shortly after we were married, then I had a teenage stepdaughter living with us, and I was really happy about that. I really liked her, and she became like a daughter to me. And then suddenly, my husband knew that I'd always wanted a child. he said, why don't you write a few letters to your nursing friends and see if one of them can find a baby? And so I did that. And 4 months later, very soon after we were married, I had this teenage stepdaughter, and we were on our way to pick up a newborn son in Arizona. The miracle of that was that the only thing I paid for was the doctor's cost, the cost of the doctor and the hospital bill. The lawyers donated, they were friends of mine, and they donated all the cost of the adoption. And so and it's the fact that we got a child, to me, was a miracle. And the fact that it cost so little was a miracle. In those days, it wasn't very much. You would have thought that would have lightened my life, but it actually, it brought joy, but not lightness. Life was still a challenge. Life was turmoil all the time. And finally, in 1985, my grandmother died. Came back to Council Grove for her funeral. And as I'm leaving, I talked to the pastor, and he said, Nancy, where are you going to church? And I said, I haven't darkened the doors of a church for almost 20 years. He put his hand on my son's shoulder and another hand on my shoulder and said, Nancy, you know God doesn't have grandchildren. Oh my. He could have preached 4 hours and not gotten to me the way those words did. I knew exactly what he meant. You're either a child of God or you're not. And so the Lord began working with me. He'd ask me to go to 3 churches and come back and tell him what I decided. Surprisingly, I did that and became a part of a congregation in Southern Baptist congregation in Liberal, where we lived. And the Lord began drawing me back to him. It made me hungry to learn the Word of God, and I spent a lot of hours in Bible studies, in prayer, and the light began coming back on in my life. I thought life was kind of steady then, a little bit more so than it had ever been. But in 2000, and within a 3-year time period, I lost my father, my mother, my husband's health was bad and he became disabled. I lost aunts and uncles. It seemed like within a 3-year time period, there was so much grief in my life. And I struggled with that. But still the Lord kept guiding me. And in 2024, another challenge came and another miracle. My kidneys went down for 4 days, and I told my friend, and she hauled me to the emergency room in Council Grove, where I was living then. My husband had died in 2014, so I'd been on my own, doing my own thing and still pretty independent, but I still had come to lean unto the Lord. And so I had been his caregiver for 11 years. He had been gone 12 years, so for 23 years, whatever that is, it had been 23 years before I'd had a crisis. And my kidneys were down. I was in the hospital in Topeka. And they told me I was going to have 2 biopsies and then dialysis. That was on a Friday. They gave me Lasix, and by Sunday night, my kidneys were starting to work a little bit, not very much. But when they told me I was going to have all that, I put my hand in the air and I said, I know the master healer. He's a friend of mine and he's going to take care of this and I won't have to have all that. Evidently, the nurses heard, because I started being visited, mostly at night, but day and night, by these really young nurses who would pray with me. And now in retrospect, I only saw them one time. Of course, they're dressed in white. I thought they were probably in nursing school or, training. But I only saw them, a lot of them, one time. And when I'd ask them, they'd say, well, we work on different floors. And I asked Rick about it, and she said, no, that doesn't happen. Anyway, I always wondered if they were angels, because they were in there regularly at night. Anyway, Monday came and they were arguing about who got to go first. Tuesday came, nothing happened. Finally, on Wednesday night or Thursday, and I'm not sure, things were pretty much a fog for me. I was praying very fervently about my healing. I told the Lord I was in his hands. I'd always been in his hands. He knew what was ahead. And I prayed, and as I was praying, I had this vision of silver coming down through the head, out my fingers and out the toes. Silver flowing through my body to purify it and cleanse all the poisons out of me. After I quit praying, or as I was finishing that prayer, a friend of mine from Council Grove called and he said, "Nancy, Patty and I know we need to pray for you." And he said, and his prayer with me was exactly what I had just prayed, that the Lord would cleanse me and purify me from the top of my head to the bottom of my toes. And then the next day I told the doctors I thought I needed to go home, and they said, "You're not ready to go home. You haven't even walked except to the bathroom and back." And so, because nothing had happened. I had had no biopsies. I had not had dialysis. None of the stuff they told me was going to happen happened. So the next day I proved to them I could walk. And finally on Friday, after I'd been there about a week or a little more, I got to go home. And it still didn't get perfect. I didn't follow up with any of the doctors. I told that was the Lord, that was all in his hands. But the thing I didn't really remember very much was Jim started calling me. I don't remember his phone calls. I knew I talked to somebody in the evening, but I thought it was a part of my imagination. And so I was home. I couldn't drive. It was a challenge as I'm trying to learn to adjust to insulin and all kinds of things, prednisone, which had my head messed up. But finally in January, all of that had happened in September. In January, he kept calling me all that time, checking on me, talking to me. I was telling him Bible stories. He was in South Dakota. I was in Council Grove. But he kept telling me I needed to follow through with those appointments for the specialists. And I did. Finally, he came down and he took me to the specialist to make sure I followed through. Of course, the tumor was still there in my kidney that they'd tried to biopsy. And so the doctor agreed with me that we could monitor that. Last fall, it began growing. And so last fall, I had to have a cancerous tumor removed from my kidney. I had to have the cancer and my whole kidney removed last late October, November. And so the Lord just continues to strengthen my body. This old barren woman was told she would never have children, has 3 children, 10 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren, and an angel great-grandchild. I praise God for his presence in my life, and I give him all the glory. He's restored an ex-husband to me, and it's given me great joy, and I thank him for that, and I thank him for his blessings. May the Lord be with you and strengthen you each day.